everybody. I'm so excited that you're here to talk about fights, basically fighting. So when you leave here, you'll be able to win every time. I'm just kidding. No, really, what I believe is that if you understand how to unpack and look closer at defensive communicators, whether it's yourself or someone else, that is a big key to bringing healing and peace in our world. It's not agreement, but it's peace. So that's one of the things that I most often talk about in different ways, and you'll find that out today as we talk. And I want you to take a good look at what I'm wearing, okay? You've already formed a first impression of me. I know that because I have learned all about first impressions from other people. So this is your second impression, and this is not how I dress normally, but it is important for my story to tell you a little bit about this moment in particular. I married someone named Jacob who also woke up that same morning and did not notice what was on his body either. So we both walked out of our in-laws' house in North Carolina. We were watching horse lessons for my stepsons here, and we had just picked up that dog off the side of the highway on our way down to North Carolina, who she had escaped. Her name is Hazel. So it was a very, very touching moment, and we were not concerned about what we were wearing, and I had no idea that this would end up becoming a pivotal part of one of the talks that I do, but it is. Later, when I sent that picture to a friend of mine to show her our dog, she commented about what we were wearing. And that is when I realized that we had a very awkward moment. Have you ever seen the awkward family photo book? Yeah, this is ours. It's not as good as the ones in that book are, but anyway, so Jacob and I have learned together a lot about communication. And actually, some of the information I'm going to share with you today not only influenced the direction of my life and caused me to not pursue a career anymore working at a corporate location or environment, and instead to leave so that I could tell people everywhere what I know that is life-changing. The second reason it was really big is because his reaction to what I'm sharing with you is the reason why I married him. So it's important stuff. Jacob and I, last spring, 2018, we were having a really peaceful morning in our kitchen, which is in a small, it's a farmhouse, old farmhouse kitchen, not very far from here. And I remember I was watching the sun come through the windows and thinking about how much I love our cupboards. I think about that all the time. They're original, they're really large, they're long. Anyway, I'm sitting there thinking that, and my stepsons were not with us that weekend, which meant that we didn't have to make a big breakfast for anybody, right? So we were having bagels in the kitchen, and I do know that I say bagels. Funny, it's been brought to my attention. We were having bagels, and I decided that I wanted jam. And I don't usually eat jam. For some reason, we have a lot of jam in our house. People give us jam all the time. We like jam. It's just not always a thing, right? So I went over to the fridge to get the jam out that I wanted, and I opened the fridge, and I'm looking through the 7 jams, and I'm realizing that 6 of them have gone bad. The 7th one was not an option for me. So I just pushed them all back in, because who wants to clean out your fridge on a Saturday morning, right? Not me. And then I went and I sat back down, and I thought, maybe we have jam somewhere else. So I said, honey, do you know if we have jam anywhere else? Because he organizes our kitchen and a lot of our life. It's not like I don't help, but he knows where stuff is that I don't. And he said, oh, probably, right? So he's looking around, and then he goes in the fridge. And he does the same thing. He pulls out all those jams, looks at them, and then he pushes them right back in, right? He doesn't want to clean the fridge out either. But he pulls out that 7th jam, which was good, but it was apricot, which is disgusting. So as he turns to me and says, he starts to open his mouth. Before he opens his mouth, I say, oh, I don't like that jam. I'm good. And he says, I know, obviously. Just like that. No, I'm not exaggerating, and no, he's not an asshole. However, that moment shifted the entire day, the entire weekend, and became really crucial to how I talk through defensive communication with audiences. So don't tell him I'm telling you this. I'm just kidding, I have his permission. But how we went through that day and unpacked it became really just such a good example of defensive communication at home, right? It starts at home, but it is also at work and in our communities. Maybe it's not at Google. Because Googlers, from what I've seen just today, and people I know who have worked here, are pretty intentional people, right? You're intentional people, you're educated, you're doing your best, you're here for a reason. So it might not be as impactful to you at work, but some people in some workplaces have this issue all the time. So I'll tell you the rest of what happened to Jacob and I later. But first I want to tell you about the day I bought these pants. They're awesome pants, aren't they? So, right? Anyway, so recently, a couple weeks ago, I'm buying these pants. And I'm at a department store near here that will remain unnamed. And I'm standing there, and I hear a customer asking quietly something. I hear her tone, I hear she's saying something. The reason I noticed that is because the manager, his volume started to raise. And the customer finally said, "Can you keep your voice down?" Like that. And of course I start paying attention. It's like a car wreck, right? I mean, you cannot help it. I'm going, what is going on between these two, right? So I'm listening. Eventually, I realize as they're talking that she is asking what this department store does with her personal information, how they secure it. And this woman clearly does not know what to do with this question. And it's a valid question. Wouldn't you agree that that's a valid question today, right? But it was not going well. Instead, the manager was getting defensive, harried, upset, did not know what to do. That was pretty obvious to me watching. The customer was getting really upset because she was being nice. She was asking, I just want to know how you handle my information. So as I got closer, I could hear what she was saying. I just want to know what happens. I just need this information from you. This is how we do this here. That's the online part of our business. That's what she said. That's the online part of our business. So I'm sitting there and I Google information security with this company, right? Wouldn't you know, first 3 results are their information security policy, which is clearly outlined on the internet. So the 2 women, the manager behind the desk and the customer, walk in front of me kind of to go to another register right here. And as this woman walks by, I tap her and I say, "Excuse me, just so you know, they do have a policy. So it's right here if you want to look at it. You can see how your information is handled." And then she looks at me and she says, "Great, that would have been really helpful to look that up," like that, right? And the lady is mortified that had been handling her. So I sort of just diffuse this by saying to the woman, "That's a very valid concern that you have." And I said, "That's a really important question to know the answer to if you're concerned about it in today's world. But my guess is that this woman and maybe the employees here in the brick and mortar store might not have been told how to answer that question if someone like you walked into their store." Just a guess, based on the reactions and the fact that the other employee was not speaking up and helping either. So I said, that's clearly an issue and that should change, right? But it didn't change. So it is what it is. It's a tough thing to talk about information and what we do with it in today's world. And they both kind of took a breath and saw a different perspective with each other, right? And they walked away and it was fine. But I had been thinking about all the different stories I could tell you today about how defensive communication shows up in businesses. And that one stuck out as so important for probably pretty obvious reasons to share here today with you. But it also shows up in our communities. And it starts when we can't get along and we don't know how to talk through things that we don't agree with. It's much easier if we're surrounded by people who agree with us, and this isn't a necessary thing to learn about. But we'll talk more about that later. I want to tell you about the horse. Those of you that picked up your asshole book of mine already most likely have this picture in the front of it as a gift. You're lucky because I don't usually give it away in this talk. It's actually part of a different talk I do that has to do with communication and relationship stuff being really a security and safety issue, because I directly believe that it is, and it contributes to our stress level at home, which bleeds into work, blah, 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 blah. So I gave a lot away at some recent all-staffs that I gave, and one of my audiences, actually two of them had a lot of police officers in them. The other 2 did not have as many police officers, but there were many police officers. So I had a lot of fun talking about that and then explaining the horse to them. You'll understand why in a minute. This is kind of a hallmark of mine that I use this picture. So this horse in the background, if we imagine, this horse in the background has thoughts. It might think, what the is that? I know horses and I know people. I don't really know horse people though. What is that, right? We like to think that. So when humans get new information, we do a few different things. One, we either immediately assimilate it and adjust for it. Two, we might sort of tag it. Maybe it's a red flag, for instance, if someone has poor behavior and you notice that, but you haven't seen it before, so you don't do anything, but you make a mental note of it. Or, and this is the fun part, we don't even see it because it's so far out of our beliefs and out of our experience, we don't even recognize it. So it's interesting to me that a lot of people have no idea that even though they're really, really great communicators, there are ways and things to learn about communication that make you exceptional at it, even if you were born wonderful, which I'm just guessing many of you are wonderful people, right? So, I mean, I feel like I'm kind of wonderful sometimes. So that's how I like to talk about how we take in information. I use the term schema because it makes the most sense to me. I've noticed if I say perception, blind spot, bias, and mindset, people just check right out, which defeats the entire purpose, right? I want you to check in. So schema is a framework, as you know, from your own usage of schema in different ways. But in psychology, it explains the way we learn. And it was developed actually by someone who died 40 years ago, but who studied the way that children learn and developed that in that arena in psychology. And so that's where I get that information about what we do with new information. So my hope today, it's not like this, there's so much research on defensiveness, this is a very well-known thing, but my hope today is that something new sticks out to you that you're unaware of that changes something for you in a positive direction. And the purpose of giving this picture away is to give you a nice little visual reminder of what we do with new information, if you imagine you're the horse. So, with defensiveness, the most important thing is understanding your own early warning system. It's why I jokingly entitled this DEFCON. I thought that was funny. I'm not sure that people got it, but DEFCON, defensive communication. Besides, there's also DEFCON, which is the first hackers conference. I'm sure some of you know it, right? And then there's the defensive readiness system, right? All of that has to do with preparation and understanding and knowing and being ready and all that stuff. It doesn't really help if we are in defensive readiness. My husband, unbeknownst to me that day, he was ready to be defensive. I had no idea. I was peacefully thinking about cupboards, right? No idea. That's not where he was at. So one of the things I'm about to pull up here is a list of ways that you can observe yourself if you're in fight or flight, or if you're feeling really defensive or really attacked. Defensive people feel attacked. It's a real thing. And sometimes they are attacked because someone's not handling a conversation with care. So it's not like it comes out of nowhere. We react that way when we feel attacked. So it might happen unconsciously, but it is observable. So it's just like I tell my students. You need to be aware of your incorrect use of like, you know, and before you have any chance of changing it. So I drill that into students that I teach because I want them to go to an interview and sound like they can speak without using fillers. Same thing here, but you have to become aware of it. When you become aware of it, then you can help your children become aware of it. You can help them manage their anger. We have kind of an angry world to an extent around us. So there are people in our communities and there are people online that are just angry. So this is really important to understand. It feels like 0 to 100, but all of this and some of it happens right in those times, and it is observable. So if you take a look at those, look for what you think is you. The thing about defensive communicators and defensive communication in general is that if we're in fight or flight, which those are often happening at the same time, then our problem solving goes out the window because our IQ dropped. And that's because our body is in overdrive. Our heart is beating over 100 beats a minute, which means our blood pressure has skyrocketed. Our vision narrows, our hearing diminishes. We can't hear as well. If any of you have ever been in a car accident and time seemed to slow down, that's a dramatic example of what's happening. But it definitely means that we cannot communicate. So if you take a look at that last thing that is up there, this is what happens when relationships deteriorate and conversations deteriorate to the extent that you have gone full force into fight or flight. Usually one person leaves. They can't deal. But the other person chases. And that, my friends, is where things go sideways, more than they already have. So what's happening, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about conflict in a moment, but what's happening is the person who's leaving instinctively knows that it's going to get worse if they stay and they can't handle that. So in a sense, it's protecting their relationship. But they don't explain it that way. They're just gone, right? They want to get away from the source of their stress. So the other person feels ignored and angry, misunderstood, whatever is happening, right? And they chase. It's called the demand withdrawal pattern, and it's called many other things too, but it is a real thing. So it's important to understand when you see your red flags, you are not capable of communicating well. Physiologically, it's not your fault. So you can understand when children are in playgrounds and they're screaming at each other and they're angry, they also cannot communicate well, but they have not learned the braking system yet. It's part of, they're a kid, right? They will learn it, hopefully, eventually. So in fight or flight, your foot is on the gas when your brain wants to put on the brakes. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but it's important to be aware first thing. Research tells us that we cannot predict one person's communication or behavior. We will not be able to predict if your neighbor's child will turn out to be a president or a school shooter. We're very inaccurate with predictions. But there are some things that are predictable, one of which is conflict, followed by relationship deterioration, which I love talking about. So let's introduce this in kind of a fun way. I do this to all audiences, not just you. But when you Google the phrase, "in Michigan can," what do you think is the number one most searched thing, and no cheating? What comes to your mind? Keep it in your mind, no need to say out loud. Once you have it in your mind, let me show you what actually people are searching. In Michigan, can a felon own a gun, and can you shoot an intruder are the top two most searched phrases. Were you expecting that? No, right? I mean, I hope not, right? Unless you did it last night. I'm just wondering, what should I do with my gun, right? No, so it's interesting to think about. We don't know what is in one person's mind. This is in way more than one person's mind, clearly. Guns are on our mind as a country, I found out, because I've done some research into this. However, you can predict conflict, right, and defensiveness. It happens to everybody, just like falling off a bike happens to almost everybody who learned how to ride a bike. Unless you're a rare, gifted person and just got that right away. Good for you. But it happens to all of us. We fall flat on our face communicatively. We're human beings. We're not perfect. The police that I spoke to, without fail, most of them thought that the top search had to do with weed. Did some of you think that? Yeah, you too, right? Yeah. Well, that's because that's something that Michigan is working through, right? How we use, what we use, how we measure, what problem, right? Unintended consequences, that kind of thing. So that's what's on people's minds. Who knows why exactly? Defensiveness is one of what are referred to as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Some of you may have heard of that. That is how relationship deterioration is predicted. That is the information I learned 15 years ago that caused me to shift directions in life. Eventually, I went out to the Gottman Institute in Seattle And I got professionally connected with them as an educator, which just means I can teach their stuff, run workshops, do that stuff, right? Because this is compelling, and this, I still cannot believe I did this. After my first huge blowout with my then boyfriend, now husband, I handed him a stack of papers and said, can you read this and just let me know what you think of it? It was explaining the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Half an hour after we fight is not a good time. His face was still red, right? But to his credit, he read it. 10 minutes later, he says, I think I'm familiar with this. I think it's great, just like that. And I said, good, cool. Because I had decided along the way, before that fight, that I needed to marry someone who was very open, humble, who had humility, someone who I don't want to be married to someone who has a stigma around counseling, for instance, right? Not going to happen for me. I think we always need help, so we can always be better. So if he would have answered that differently, I would have been out the door. I don't care how I felt about him, because I knew instinctively in 2013 that this was going to be a part of my life, this information, and it was. So I'm lucky because he really does walk out what he said, right? He's always working on himself as well. So the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, I'm going to briefly tell you what they are. So contempt is the number 1 predictor of divorce. Contempt is the number 1 predictor of divorce. Makes sense why. It also makes sense that in our communities, when there's contempt, it's the worst form, in a sense, of a place to try to recover from. It's really hard. The other 3, contempt is 1, are criticism, which is defined by using the words always or never. You never listen to me. You're always late. Or a pronouncement of someone. Are you just incompetent? Right? So that's criticism, and people respond by getting defensive to it. So there's a right way to handle a criticism, and then a wrong way, and that's the wrong way. 97% of the time, their research shows at the Gottman Institute, if you start out a conversation with a criticism, you won't be able to recover that conversation. Might as well start over. The 4th one is stonewalling. And that one is when you're in fight or flight so much that you leave, like I said earlier. You become a stonewall, you stop responding. When they interviewed stonewallers, they found out that they were thinking things like 10 more minutes, and then she's got to stop. The game's going to come on. It's just be quiet. Don't do anything, right? Don't say anything. Or they would leave because they couldn't deal with it, right? The problem is they did leave the relationship. So that does create some tension, and it's understandable that the other person feels that as ignoring or uncaring, right? So you have to know those red flags in order to put a stop to what's happening and take a break so that you can return to it later. The things that you do instead of criticism, complaining without blame. So we're going to talk about all of this just a little bit more in a little while. But complaining without blame and giving the person a way to win with you is a way to do a difficult conversation. So I noticed that you didn't involve my brother again at dinner last night. Can you work on that? You know he's feeling left out. Instead of, do you listen to me? Didn't we just talk about this with my brother? You didn't talk to him. That's totally different. Sometimes I think that conflict and difficult conversations could just be solved if we thought before we opened our mouth. Because some of this is habitual. I get told all the time, I'm just blunt. People need to learn how to deal with the truth because that's what I tell them. And they need to just be more, they need to be able to hear it. No, they don't, right? If you're told that by a bunch of people who experience you as rude, you're the asshole, not them, right? And I love blunt people. I consider myself one of them. It's blunt with using your words for good and help instead of bad and malice or anything of that nature. So those are 2 different ways of being blunt that are helpful or not. The answer to contempt, it takes a long time to develop contempt. It's the result of long-held beliefs that are negative towards someone. So just because it takes a long time to develop, it takes a long time to undo. It takes time to practice thinking and saying positive things so that you build the culture you want, which you, of all people, understand. You have to build the culture you want, be proactive, right? When I first started speaking, I think people were interested, found it interesting what I speak about, but in a sense it was, no, it's just soft skills, right? Not now. Now, companies understand that soft skills, unchecked, unplanned, unthought about, can translate to people who are not a fit, who cause trouble, who sue, who misread intentions, and it can cost billions of dollars, actually, if it's not thought about and planned. So it is really important to understand some of this stuff. So we talked about contempt, we talked about criticism. Now we need to talk about defensiveness, right? The one reason I'm here, which we'll go more into in a minute. But defensiveness is a counterattack, or it's playing the victim. It has many ways of showing up, as you saw here. Like if someone's defensive, they might just vomit information on you and think if they tell you for a seventh time, maybe you'll get it. That's someone who's in fight or flight, who's being defensive, right? The other thing with playing the victim is someone who typically feels like things happen to them and it's unfair. They're stuck in that. They're not usually aware of it, but they grow up to be that adult who doesn't really think things are their issue to look at because it's out of their control. It really feels that way to them. So they're the ones who inside of a fight might say something like, "Why are you always criticizing me? I can't do anything right with you." Right? They really feel that way, by the way. They're not bad people. They really feel that so you should think about if you're always criticizing them. That's a valid thing. However, more often than not, they're feeling that way, and that's what comes out of their mouth. But the result of that is often that the person who brings up something is trying to comfort them. And actually, if you're trying to comfort someone who has a perception that is wrong, it's not really helpful or effective to spend time doing that. What it does is it detours you. It's like a red herring I have later that will distract you from getting to the point of whatever it was that you brought up. So it's important to understand that that's what happens when you start to comfort someone who's playing the victim. With kids, you have to realize that, right? And orient them back. It's just like in a meeting when you parking lot stuff. Oh, that's interesting. And you're thinking, that's such a rabbit trail. We don't have time for that today. It's not part of today. However, you want people to feel heard. So you write it down, right? Come back to it later. Stay on point. So the answer to, this is surprising. The answer to stonewalling is self-soothing. Anything that calms you down. Definitely not something that amps you up. So not calling someone who will just support you and get you even madder because that's obviously horrible what that person was doing, right? That's not helpful because it makes it bigger. It makes it grow. So it's really important to do that. So we'll talk more about this in a minute. Just for fun, because I'm beginning to do some work with a nationwide nonprofit that I'll tell you about in a minute. But I looked up Colorado, and Colorado they are interested in weed. That's their number one search. Can nurses smoke weed? Isn't that interesting? I just wonder why they wonder that about nurses in particular, right? So it's interesting. The rest of the main searches had to do with I describe it as nature or outdoor questions for obvious reasons, right? Colorado is very beautiful. Then you have when can you get an abortion, followed by can you own a pit bull? Those are the most searched things right now related to in Colorado can. These are all examples of things that people not only are on their minds, obviously, but they disagree about pretty strongly. So that is a lot of how to begin taking the claws out of these conversations matters, whether it's something innocuous like jam or abortion. Better Angels is the nonprofit that I work with. The reason I work with them is because of my guest today, actually, who's Maggie Bayless from Zingerman's. She pulled me in to work with them because of what I was doing around defensive communication is what they're doing. So they're teaching people across the nation to be able to more peacefully converse in political discourse when they really disagree with each other. So deepening understanding and connection. It was started in Ohio by Republicans right after the last election, who reached across to some people that they knew and decided to get together and try this out. And then it just kind of took off, and you can look up at the website if you're curious about it. But they gave me permission to use this for today. This describes thoughts, feelings, and perspectives of the other. You'll probably recognize yourself somewhere in here, right? So we know someone typically who falls in all places on here. But if you look at where disdain is, that to me is the closest to contempt. And that is communal deterioration. Because community happens in conversations. It happens at a coffee house. It happens at a fire. It happens camping. It happens at a circus. It happens anywhere. And it happens online. So it's important to know and to spread the knowledge about how we see each other and why it matters. It's actually not relevant if we're right or wrong in order to have these conversations. It's not about that. It's a false choice. It's about being able to exist together. So I think that's a very interesting thing. And since they started in Ohio, of course, I had to use Ohio, right? In Ohio, there are many counties that you can't drink. Or you can't drink on Sunday, or you can't drink. There's just certain rules in parts of Ohio. So a lot of the searches, I think it's 3 of the top searches, had to do with alcohol. Can you get a DUI expunged was one. Can you drink with your parents? Then there's the riding in a truck, which I identify with, because who doesn't want to try riding in the back of a truck at least once in their life, right? We can't really do that these days. Then we have, can you be fired for no reason? And license plates. And finally, it's also on their mind, shooting an intruder. So I also looked at California. I did not include it, but California went a little further. They have, can you kill an intruder? None of the other states had that. But California first had a bunch of labor-related searches, which makes sense, right? Then some very random searches, and then the gun ones, the similar gun ones. So it's just kind of fascinating to me to see what's on the mind of some people in our country. I tried to find out how many people, but I don't think I'm allowed to see that. But you might be able to see that later, so someone should tell me. So, like I said earlier, first thing is awareness. First thing is awareness. If we're managing ourselves, then we can manage other people better. And nowadays, we know, and we do more of this because it's culturally expected to some degree in some areas of our country. But we know that it's not helpful to tell a 10-year-old who's very angry to deal with it, right? It's not a great idea. So now we give them, if we're good and we're holding our own, right? We don't react to that. We give them space to process it and then help them separate their anger from their actions. If we don't do that, then they might grow up and not really know that 1, anger is okay and appropriate and normal, and 2, what to do with it. So all those things are easy red flags that we can recognize so that we don't feel like we have to go drink by ourselves in a corner, which I have no problem with personally. But that is kind of where, like, it's a coping mechanism, right? To be able to talk about these things in a healthy way, make decisions about it. So we talked earlier about looking for what you can acknowledge and what you can agree with. The woman at the department store, who will remain unnamed, if she had said, I'm not sure, let me find out for you, that would have been one really good way of answering that. Or what really good communicators or customer service people understand, sometimes intuitively, sometimes not, is that there's a question behind the question. There's something underneath that actually is what matters. So the same thing applies when someone brings something to you. It's like a gift. It's sometimes a gift that you don't want, and it might have ugly wrapping paper. However, it is like a gift if you know what to do with it and unwrap it. And that involves having an attitude of curiosity. So to try to understand. So if she had said to this woman, that's an interesting question, I'm not sure. right? That would have been a really good way to just acknowledge her and look for what she can agree with. I'm going to find out. Can you tell me more about this and what it means to you? Now she has a customer that's happy, right? And this is something that's going to get asked, I would guess, more and more in our world today. So it's important to think about that. What I see a lot in difficult conversations, especially when they're online, like last night when I was in my local community's Facebook group and watching it devolve so quickly that it was like an online train wreck, not a car wreck, a train wreck, right? It goes so quickly down the tubes that it's crazy. And that's because this happens. People start having a power struggle. And it's like their children screaming, I want to be heard. I'm right. You're wrong. You suck. You're terrible. Right? So that's what I see when I think about it and when I process how people are communicating. It is very easy. It's very easy and quick to lose your temper and post something or send an email, or otherwise known as an amygdala hijack, right? Which you may be familiar with. When you are very angry, then you might do something that you regret. People that don't understand their red flags, or maybe they don't care, I don't know what their motivations are, but when they don't understand their red flags, they have no chance of not posting something because they feel righteous in that moment. One of my new books I'm in the middle of listening to is called The Righteous Mind. And the guy that wrote that, I just found out, is on the board of directors for Better Angels, which is fascinating. He studies morality. Really interesting guy. Anyway, so it's not about right and wrong, but we mistakenly think it is. And then we kind of miss the whole point, right? So just recently I noticed a political decision that impacted our community, our state, really. And then I noticed one party create a message about the decision and vilify the other party and the person specifically who was responsible for that decision. So what they did is they owned the narrative, got there first, got to their people, and then basically acted like a group of children saying, it's not my fault. She obviously doesn't care, he obviously doesn't care, right? That's not obvious. That's a correlation. That's a decision. It's an assumption. And that sort of thing does not unite people. But the media and who else? The media, some politicians, they understand that that's what people will take the time to read. So it's sort of a unfortunate thing that it's going to probably happen for a really long time. Anyway, here is what to do. And this is what I did with Jacob. I know that my husband is not crazy. So as much as I would love to play the victim here and the innocent person who's such a great communicator, the truth is I work on this constantly myself. I will always work on it. I will never arrive as a human being who can be an amazing communicator. Luckily, my husband also agrees with that too. So he knows me, right? I married the right guy. He sees the things I don't, and I trust him. So I knew there was something going on with him. However, I was so upset that I was doing the dishes to calm. I freaking hate doing dishes. And I was doing the dishes because it's so mindless that I knew that I could just come out of fight or flight if I would just do the dishes. Besides, there was a huge stack of them, and it would take a while. So that's what I was doing because I couldn't think straight. I felt sick, and I was tense in my shoulders. Those are my red flags that I'm really upset, which tells me I cannot communicate. And his red flags that I observe are that he gets louder and he gets red-faced, right? That's his big thing. Plus, he'll leave if we force the issue, which we don't usually do. So what we did was we instinctively separated. We came back, we tried to talk about it, it didn't work. So we separated again. Then it was probably 4 hours later that Saturday that I realized there's something going on with him, and I wanted to discover the story. If you want to understand what is behind someone's tone, what is behind their art, their perspective, who's important to you, it's important that you can come truly from a place of curiosity, not condemnation, right? Which does mean that we have to cultivate that attitude of humility, especially when we're the ones sort of under the gun, which isn't a nice feeling. So I went over to him in our living room, dining room, and I said, put my hands on his shoulders, and I said, honey, earlier there was something going on with you. I know there was. So can you tell me a little bit about what you're thinking? What was happening? He told me the night before when we ordered pizza. He ordered the pizza. We had just discovered that one of our favorite local pizza places delivers to us. They make this deep dish with mushrooms, and it's just amazing. We were so excited that they delivered to us because we're slightly rural, not that rural, but rural just enough to not get some deliveries and also not get high-speed internet. I know you can't even imagine that, can you? Yeah. I couldn't either until I bought that house. Whoops. Anyway, we love our house. However, he was on the phone ordering this pizza, and you know how sometimes when someone's on the phone, you over here can hear this person? That's what I could hear that guy. And I could tell he was not listening. He wasn't listening to us. So I'm interrupting my husband saying, hey, can you just repeat? Ask him if he heard what you said. He's not listening to you. And he's like, because it's so annoying when someone does that when you're trying to have a conversation, right? But he doesn't really do it. He kind of checked a little, but not to my satisfaction. I really did not think that we were going to get the right order. So I again said, honey, can you please check? And he's just, and he says, okay, and he hangs up. Guess what happened? You know what happened. We did not get that pizza. We got different pizza. Then he called back, and the same thing happened, actually. They listened to the issue and tried to talk, but they weren't really listening again because there was so much going on there. And I could hear that again, so then I'm again telling him, please, they're not listening. But he's so annoyed with me trying to manage it that he's not really also doing his best. So it was just a cluster. And we got the replacement pizza was also wrong. Seriously. We ended up with a $15 credit, though. I just want to mention that, is that it did have a happy ending. However, it was important, right? He felt like I was interrupting and being insensitive, and that more than that I thought that he didn't realize that the guy wasn't listening, like he's an idiot, right? It's obvious this guy's not listening. He would have handled it, but I felt the need to make sure that he was handling it. And it's a small moment, right? It's a small moment, but it really annoyed him. He hates it when people interrupt him or when he perceives that they might think that he's an idiot. It's just a pet peeve of his, right? So that is why he blew up at me. When he looked at me, he was thinking, well, obviously you don't like the jam because you would have gotten it out. I was thinking, maybe he doesn't know I like apricot jam, which is disgusting. We covered that. So I'm telling him, and he blew. So it's interesting, research shows if we don't process little moments like his annoyance with me the night before, we sometimes will just chew on it like a little piece of jewelry in our brain. And eventually we decide that that person is selfish or some sort of negative character assessment happens on our subconscious level, and it comes out later, usually, in a difficult conversation. So I knew there was a story there. I wasn't sure what it was, but I definitely played a role in that. I mean, would you agree that I was being annoying, right, the night before? Of course I was. So I understood that. I could have decided that the way he talked to me in that fight, that was not okay, and that would have had more to do with what I like to say is my story. So we get defensive because we want to feel safe, actually. We often have a fear, often untapped, that is happening in that moment. We feel misunderstood, uncared for, alienated, angry, right, whatever it is. Underneath that, there's a bunch of meaning happening. There are two people with two different stories. But most people fall for it as it's about that argument. But it's not about the argument, usually. It's about a deeper thing. And interestingly, the Gottman Institute, they showed that the way to unpack arguments, 70% of the time, conflicts are unresolvable. A lot of people think that the goal of conflict is to resolve it. That's not true. With the majority of conflict, it's not resolvable, which is why the goal is different. The goal is to listen, to understand, and learn. But what we do is we get stuck in that power struggle with people, right? Mostly because we're not thinking straight anyway, because we're in fight or flight ourselves, and so are they. So that's why if you unpack it and take that time to really come from a place of learning, it's really interesting what you can learn about other people's stories as well as your own. So it's something that's really, really improved me, our marriage, places I've spoken, their communication norms and what they can do, communities and how to talk within disagreements. So, because if you watch the next time you see something online happen, you can see the power play. And if they stepped away and realized that they didn't have to play the game, in fact, they don't have to be on the field. Instead, they can meet over here and have a conversation about what we really believe and want, for instance, then it changes everything. It does change everything without sacrificing much, just a little time, little thought, little energy, a little curiosity. It's fascinating, I think. It's just like I wrote a book about assholes, as you know, which, by the way, is going to be on TV this fall on CBS. So they're using it. It's this show about the LAPD, the TV LAPD, right? So Edie Falco is in it, and they give her the book in the show. It's actually on the trailer. It's called Tommy. And Edie Falco, I love her. But it's interesting because people, when I first came out with a book about assholes, people thought that that's what they pigeonholed me. Their schema of me became the asshole book author, right? Which is true. I don't really have a problem with that. However, I have a heart for people who are difficult. Because sometimes they're not difficult. Sometimes they don't know why they're perceived the way they are, or why they feel the way they do. And there's a whole world, like a door that you can open in your house that you saw but never opened, to this communication and relationship stuff. It's really fascinating how much there is to learn about ourselves. So I have a heart for people like that. Not for sociopaths or psychopaths. I dated one and I lived next to a murderer here in Ann Arbor. Yeah, I did almost 20 years ago. I had to testify in his trial. It was a nightmare. But anyway, so I've seen people that are evil. I would describe them as evil, right? So that is not who that book is for. I did not follow you around or your neighbor when I was writing it. I get asked that a lot. But it is about looking at how we talk about ourselves, how we create our identity. And if you're kind of in a situation where things have devolved, there's a road back to that, from that. So that's the rest of the book. If someone's kind of become an asshole, for instance, that you're in a relationship with, that can be recovered. Not always, it depends on the other person, but we have a lot of influence in our communication every time we open our mouth. So thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. I'd love to have a chat about what you heard, what you're thinking, what it reminds you of.
Hi, thanks so much for coming. So I am familiar with and love the Gottman Institute. I was wondering if there are other great resources, aside from your book, obviously, that like I follow Gottman on Facebook and see all their great little updates and stuff. Is there other great organizations or resources that would be good for us to be aware of? Also, I tried, what was your website again for your nonprofit?
Better-angels.org.
Okay, I'll try again.
Yeah. If you don't put the dash in, you end up somewhere you didn't mean to be. I found that out a couple times till I learned. Yeah. So Crucial Conversations, are you familiar with? Crucial Conversations is my #1 recommendation. It is the #1 best-selling book for interpersonal communication on Amazon, which should tell you something. So that is they take you through so many scenarios, actually, that it's a lot. But how to have difficult conversations, how to get people to come together over issues that they agree with pieces of, but maybe not the execution of or the whole thing. They have processes, exercises, they break it down. It's super informative. So the authors of that are my #1 recommendation. Yeah, I love that. It's a great book. Yes?
Hi. The Ann Arbor office is kind of transient and people usually relocate for the job specifically. There's some of the office that's from Michigan, some that's not. I'm curious on what your take is if you're not from here, but you think people back home or friends that don't live around here could benefit from this advice. I feel like it might be a little aggressive to send them the book and say like, you're an asshole, but I was just curious on your take on that.
Yeah, sure. So if I tell people if they're interested in the book, right, it grabs their attention, to read the introduction, because it tells people you would like to read it, and you and anyone else, who it's for and who it's not for, and exactly what I talk about in it. So in the introduction, you can read it on Amazon. So one of the things I say in there is, if you teach someone information from the book or from here, and it's information that you feel like they should know, but that they're not open to, then unfortunately, they experience you as kind of an asshole. So you gotta know who you're talking to. If you think it's someone who has a sliver of openness and would think it's funny, right? That's part of the reason I named it that way, because it is what it's about, but it's also funny, right? It opens doors. I have actually heard from people who were described as assholes and did not really get it. In fact, they wore it sometimes as a badge of honor, but it's caused them problems in their communities and at work especially, who get a lot out of it. But you have to know, are they kind of open? What's their humor like? If they're not, if they're truly just a jerk, then it's not your responsibility. Yeah, you're very welcome.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? Mm-hmm. So if it seems like maybe they're not just a jerk, but they're maybe not open to it, would your advice be to just do the listening activity and just trying to like listen versus continually pushing back?
Yeah, I love that you asked this question, because sometimes in my listening trainings I will tell an audience to go out and start an argument, not be a jerk, but start up something with someone they know that they disagree with around a certain thing. And then I tell them that they are only allowed to ask questions and respond with things like, that's interesting. So they have to ask questions. They're not allowed to speak what they think. They're not allowed to react, because it is not about them. That is one of the things with listening that we, I think, fail at, is listening is about who's speaking, not ourselves, right? And it's not that easy, because it's not like we leave intentionally to go think about dinner. And it's not like we check out. We just check out. It just happens, right? So inside of conflict or really tricky subject matters, the way to get, if you're ever going to have any traction or understanding or connection beyond what you already have, is you have to lead the way. And 9 times out of 10, if you do that and you pull it all from them and they're feeling heard and they're feeling understood by you around something that, let's say, they know that you totally disagree with them on, then often they will be so shocked by that, seriously. They will feel so understood and appreciative that they turn around and ask you. It totally changes conversations. I make my students do this sometimes just to give them practice at listening, because they're our future, right?
I have a 2-year-old who's an asshole. He's, as all are, he's half feral. But I think it's helpful for me to know to help him learn to not be quite so defensive as growing up. So that really resonated with me.
Oh, good. Yeah. I think, it's so funny. Sometimes I get brought in by a company to do coaching because they want their employees to feel safe, I guess, talking to someone outside of their organization. And often it ends up, yes, I'll help them with work-life balance or whatever it is, right? Or it's something they're working on, but it often ends up that they're having issues at home. And I hear a lot with children, right? So they're having an antagonist relationship with their kids, and they don't understand how to back away from that and create something better. And that is really, kids don't really know how to tell you they feel disrespected. But a lot of their gut reactions and defensiveness is because they feel like you're not recognizing their personhood, whether they're 2 or 12, and yeah, they can be assholes about it. So it's interesting, yeah. Other questions?
I guess I would just be curious to hear if there was like one top tip you had to improve like the effectiveness of our meetings specifically at work. Because I think some of the tools you might use interpersonally at home in terms of like separating or kind of coming back to that person, or using things like, obviously affection with someone who you're actually in a relationship with obviously differs when you're in the workplace. So just thinking about like what would be your top tip for improving the effectiveness of how we meet with each other here?
Yeah, I do have a top tip for that. It's what I was going to write my book on at first, but then people around me were such assholes, I decided to write that book instead. Not to me, but to people I love. 2 women were, which you'll learn about if you read the book. Anyway, my answer to that is to be other-oriented and an observer. So people usually prefer to communicate via email, phone, text, chat, whatever. There's usually a preferred method. And if you pay attention to how they prefer to be communicated with and communicate with them that way, you will develop a closer relationship with them because of it. So the other related thing to that, because communication is so other-oriented, if it's going to be its most successful, is understanding that your schema of a person around you, which is developed by your experiences of them as well as what people say about them, etc. If you have a negative schema about someone, you will do things like avoid them, cut them off in meetings, right? So it's important to get a hold of your schema if it has any negative unintended consequences because of holding that belief. I don't know if that's ever an issue here. It usually is where there's groups of people. Might not be talked about, but yeah. And I think just being careful of the knowledge that words have power, the way we describe things has power, and our reputations are gold. So being careful about just continuing to contribute to Google the way that you do, you know? Assuming the best of people, that kind of thing. Yeah. Thanks for having me.